Last time, I ended by telling you that I was about to do something I have never done before. And today's theme grows from that, wholehearted. No, I didn't suddenly grow butterfly wings. They are still invisible. But I did take a few more steps, lighter steps, braver steps. And because I was given time to prepare for this new thing, I want to use that preparation here with you as well. I want to share the main message that it shaped from the sermon I recently held. It might sound slightly different from what my usual episodes sounds like, since it comes from what I truly want to live by and act from. You will see the similarities. Wholehearted. I was sitting on the bed, wrapped in a blanket, in a beautiful castle room in the middle of Sweden. It was really an early morning, the fourth day of a 5-day silent retreat. Outside the window, the sun was rising over a late September landscape. Soft, golden, almost weightless. Outwardly, everything had been silent for days. Inwardly, not at all. Especially those first days. My mind was loud, restless, racing ahead of me. In front of me were my notes. A few books, 2 Bibles opened. One particular verse had followed me into that retreat. A verse that I had received at the very beginning of my sick leave, 6 months earlier. And now I was only days away from returning to full-time work again. In my thoughts, I was already 1 week ahead, worrying about whether I would cope or not. But the stillness of the place had slowly helped me to shift my focus from performance, from capacity, from will I manage, to something else, to listening. And I read the verse again. And then a thought came. Try reading it through the lens of your experience and abilities. And something inside of me leaped. Wow, this is how the key is meant to be used. Last year in our church, we focused on vision, on Habakkuk climbing up in the high watchtower to see clearly. I have never seen that watchtower, but I imagine that it's really, really high. And when you climb high enough, you will gain perspective. You will see really long. And I also suppose that it's really, really quiet and peaceful there. This year, the focus has shifted towards the habits. Not habits as rigid duties, but habits more as relationships. Opening the Bible with a curiosity, whispering, Jesus, what do you want to show me today? In Romans 12, Paul describes us as one body, each part necessary, each part carrying a function. If we imagine vision as the eyes, seeing the direction, and the habits are the hands and the muscles carrying it out, then what gives it power? It is the heart that pumps life through the body. As long as the heart beats, vision and action can connect. So let's begin there. I want us to look at David today, before he was known as a king, before the titles, before the victories. God described him in a strikingly simple way, a man after my own heart. Not a role, not a resume, not a position. Identity. When Samuel was sent to anoint the next king, he saw Eliab, the first strong, impressive, outwardly fitting. But God said, people look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. One by one the sons passed until the 8th son stood before Samuel, David. And God said, he's the one. Later, when Goliath stood mocking Israel morning and evening, it was not the trained soldiers who stepped forward. They had the armor, they had the swords, they had experience, but they also had fear, because their focus was fixed on the size of the giant. David's focus was elsewhere. When he stood before Saul and said that he would fight, he did not speak from arrogance. He spoke from experience. I have fought lions, bears, while tending sheep. The Lord who delivered me then will deliver me now. He was wholehearted. Not because he believed in himself alone, but because he trusted that the one who stood with him. Saul tried to dress him in royal armor. David tried to walk in it and realized that this is not me, so he took it off. He stepped onto the battlefield not as a pretend soldier, but as a shepherd, as himself, with a sling, with stones, with faith. He did not play someone else's role. He was wholeheartedly himself. And when Goliath approached, David ran towards him, not in his own strength, but in the name of the Lord. And the stone found its mark. Behind David stood an entire army, trained, equipped, capable. The difference was not the competence, it was focus. They fixed their eyes on external circumstances. David fixed his heart on God. So let me ask you, what in you needs strengthening so that you can live more wholeheartedly? Romans 12 begins with a clear invitation. Offer your whole self to God, the whole heart, not just your spiritual moments, but your ordinary life, sleeping, eating, working, walking. In the message, it says to take your everyday life and place it before God as an offering. And then verse 2, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And the word transformed comes from the Greek metamorphosis, the same word used for a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. Not cosmetic change, deep transformation, from the inside out. And the other place this word appears speaks of becoming more radiant as we draw closer to God. Not because of what we achieve, but because of who we are becoming in His presence. On the final morning of the retreat, as the silence was about to lift, a man walked up to me in the breakfast room and whispered, "When I saw you at morning mass yesterday, you were glowing with such gentle joy." It encouraged me. Later, another woman comes up and says something pretty similar. Driving home, I spoke with a close friend. I tried to explain the week, still not quite ready to put it into words. But my friend, she summarizes it and says, "When I hear you now, you sound like yourself again, like you did years ago, before everything heavy happened. It sounds like you are in the right place right now." She was right. I had found a place where I was wholehearted again. When I arrived, I was focused on performance, on whether I would cope. When I left, I was focused on relationship, on wanting to grow closer to God. Near the end of his life, David spoke to his son Solomon. He said, "Get to know well your father's God. Serve him with a whole heart and eager mind, for God examines every heart and sees through every motive. If you seek him, he will make sure you find him, but if you abandon him, he will leave you for good." Look sharp now. God has chosen you to build a holy house. So be brave, determined, and do it. From this, we can get 3 simple invitations. Like first, know God personally, honestly. And the second one is to serve him wholeheartedly and willingly. And thirdly, be faithful and courageous. Start where you are. As you are, sit down with Jesus as you would with a friend. Let your heart's conversation with him shift your focus from limitations to possibilities. In his presence, transformation happens. You may not sprout visible wings, but inwardly metamorphosis. And remember, God has placed specific passions in your heart, specific abilities, specific experiences. Strengthen those muscles. Practice the habits that align you with who you are, whether you are eating, sleeping, leading a team, or standing before a giant. Do it wholeheartedly, not alone, because Jesus promised to be with us always. Wholehearted leadership does not begin with louder confidence. It begins with anchored identity, with heart aligned. So today, as you step into whatever stands before you, be wholehearted, be confident, be you.